as well as continuous rise in sea levels. This worrying global picture necessitates bold and concrete efforts to adapt to an increasingly warming climate, particularly for communities in vulnerable situations, especially those in developing countries who are at the front lines of this essential threat. Despite the size and urgency of this challenge, the funding options and opportunities available to developing countries to adapt to climate change continue to significantly fall short of what will be required. This session seeks to shed light on this worrying global picture by discussing the importance of ensuring adequate finance is secured for adaptation, particularly in developing countries and more so for Africa. The opportunities for scaling up adaptation from public and private sectors and the role of multilateral development banks in creating the paradigm shift required to address this challenge. So, please welcome with me our distinguished moderator, Mr. Miron, co-chair Sherpa Coalition of Finance Ministers, and of course our Excellency, Your Excellency, Your Highness, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Egypt Minister of Environment. We have Dr. Laura Dashi, Executive Secretary of ISPA. We have Mr. Marcos Prado, President of New Development Bank, Mr. Jay Collins, Vice Chairman of Capital Markets and Advisory at Citibank, and of course, Ms. Claire Coaster, Global Head of ESG and Sustainable Finance Investment Bank, Deutsche Bank. Thank you so much all for your time.
Thank you very much. It's making an hour outside of the work activity, so it's a few minutes to go. We need to be pretty efficient because we are running a bit late, and I think the way we do this as Minister Fouad will have to be that I will ask three questions. We go one by one with the rest, but just the Minister will comment all in one go with the rest to go if all that's coming for everybody. But so this is an important topic, obviously, for the Egyptian presidency, and I can just tell you that today we had the finance ministers meeting, and this was the main topic was adaptation and finance in that context. And there were many sort of important conclusions. We need to work more on it. We need to have better strategies, adaptation strategies. We need to be able to assess the risks better. And there's a lot to do, and we need better know-how and capacity in how to do this. Of course, there are the ecosystem of different actors. That's why this panel is extremely interesting to hear different angles from different perspectives. But maybe there are three questions to be asked about the challenges, what are hampering the adaptation financing, then what are the key instruments, actors, approaches, and maybe on the barriers, what are the critical barriers. These are the questions that we're going to be asking one by one. But just maybe general impressions from the Minister before we start getting into these questions. So Minister, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Let me, at the outset, although the room is not full, but that is one of the most critical issues that's important, not only for the developing country, but for the COP27 presidency. Because what's happening around the world right now in 2022 is exactly what we need to discuss, which is financing adaptation. The very regular figures shows that, for example, we will need around 300 trillion for adaptation between 2020 and 2030. And it's always so that adaptation is something that is not possible. It's not bankable. That's a very good question, whether it's bankable, yes or no, and how can we best adapt. And the discussion would always go back and forth To adapt, you have to keep the 1.5 alive, so they are interconnected. But no one has ever thought, does adapting means more investment? Can we translate the measures that we put in adaptation, in figures, in USD, and see what would be the benefit and the result of that? The answer, amazingly, is yes. That the Global Commission on Adaptation reported that investing a $1.8 trillion globally in adaptation could, whether it's early warning system, infrastructure, climate resilience, could produce a $7.1 trillion. So we have here an equation that needs to be further analyzed for that argument. Lately, when we used to discuss adaptation, we were saying how much we're securing from our investment if we better adapt. Now, how much are we promoting for the investment? Challenges would vary between the governance, the institutional framework. Are countries able to put their plans? Are their plans able to be bankable and investable? Secondly, the role of the private sector and how can the private sector do and contribute more, but in fact lead within the adaptation spectrum. And the discussion is actually could be disappointing because that same discussion we had 7-8 years ago when the renewable energy were not bankable. And when we were sitting around the table saying the cost of renewable is high, it's not affordable for developing countries. That's not the case. We're here in COP27, COP for implementation, talking about the just transition, the affordable, and how best can we accelerate. The same story should apply to the adaptation through 3 important factors. 1, accelerate the global goal on adaptation and its definition. What you cannot measure, you cannot simply improve and keep progress on. And that's the reason why we've been for the last 3 years saying we need to have a target for adaptation. Like exactly when we have a target of the 1.5 and the equivalent calculation of how we're reducing greenhouse gases, we need to agree on a target for the global goal of adaptation because that's a key and an entry point for accessing the adaptation finance, even if that adaptation finance is. Second, never think of adaptation as a part that would only belong to the developing countries, but try to change the formula of how best can the private sector be engaged. I have a very good solid example here that would even be discussed on the 16th. We've always been thinking that climate, biodiversity, and land regulation, that's a failure in the thinking to say so, because they will go together. Isn't that a time that in a COP for implementation to do that strong linkages between the biodiversity and the climate, when the ecosystem services and the nature-based solution could be at the heart of that, what kind of private sector would be there? The least I can mention, the least, is the tourism sector. That generates a lot of income for many countries, but part of the GDP, and especially the developing countries, and between brackets debate Africa as being responsible and depending its economy on the ecotourism. That's a very simple example. So here we have something straightforward we can start working on. The third for the adaptation finance would be the role of the MDBs. If at some point of time the same story of the renewable energy, the MDBs pitched in to de-risk either your de-risking policies or your de-risking finance, we need to apply that. We cannot ask countries to develop their national adaptation plan and then we tell them, go and search for the funding for implementation. If together for implementation is the slogan for that COP, then the MDBs have to prove that by stepping in and saying, this is a model where we are de-risking policies, we are de-risking finance, let's put our hand together, public and private and the MDBs to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Minister. Minister, you may mistake for a quick round of comments on what you said. Because I think we could take the panel to the next question about the challenging, there's many issues. So let's have the benefit of the Minister, just very quick comments on the challenges, on the points that the Minister made. Okay, would you like to start?
Can you hear me? Yes. So first of all, let me just, you can hear me, I'm not sure. The microphone's working, it is wonderful. So let me just take the tragedy of the horizon, Mark Carney's concept and apply it to adaptation. Physical risk versus energy transition risk, if you put it in risk terms, adaptation risk has a lot of physical risk. And if you take the tragedy of the horizon, you look out forward, and we take physical risk from 100-year natural disaster events to 1 in 10 events, you're uninsurable, you're unmitigatable, you're unbankable, and you're uninvestable. So unless you figure out how to put more adaptation money into the physical risk components of what we're doing, the investor market will look forward and it will probability weight how bad those disasters are getting, and it will de-risk you. And even mitigation strategies won't work. So you have to not ignore mitigation. You have to not ignore adaptation as we mitigate. Second is, a lot of people will tell you, I remember one of our first meetings, we had this debate over, does the private sector have a role in adaptation? And there are people that believe it's just the public sector thing. No, not so fast. First of all, if you look at the numbers, it'll tell you 4% of adaptation is actually private sector. So rounding error. And so a policymaker could look at that and say, actually, private sector doesn't have much of a role. Well, first of all, I question the accounting and the methods of the whole thing. So let's look at a couple of components. Let's start with infrastructure, resilient infrastructure. So why don't you tell CDPQ, Brookfield, and Temasek that resilient infrastructure doesn't involve crowding in the private sector? I ran global infrastructure for Citi. PPPs are public-private partnerships. We invest in infrastructure with public sector flows, and they're mitigated by the MEGAs of the world. You need 1,000 more MEGA-type breach of contract and political risk insurance structures to do them. But infrastructure, resilient infrastructure, is essential, and it's going to be done in partnership. And Minister, it won't be 5 times multiples of mobilization rates. Okay, now let's take agriculture. Agriculture, are we going to really say to Bunge and ADM and John Deere and the large fertilizer players in the world that private sector doesn't have much to do with the future of agriculture? That ag tech doesn't have much to do with the future of agriculture? Kraft just raised a fund, a PE firm, to bring ag tech into the emerging markets and fund it with mitigation strategies. That's cool. So now let's take water. I'm going to tell Rivelis, that's owned by Temasek, one of the largest irrigation players in the world, that we can't crowd in structures with the private sector, or take ACON, take take Suez. Are we going to tell Suez that the private sector funding for them in water desalinization that will be both for green hydrogen and for communities? So my point is the private sector is at that table, can be at that table. The mitigation needs are tremendous. So right now with this Moethi success story, one of the important things that Moethi has done is to partner segment by segment of Moethi with some of the largest MPPs and accelerators in this space, and EFAP is taking agriculture. So EFAD is looking at all of the structures to crowd in the private sector, including co-lending facilities to local banks in the world, where banks can lend with their protection. They enable the Adaptation ag environment. They get it ready. They partner with the co-ops and the farmers, and the private sector then, banks included, can lend into that. So we're going to have to work hard. If there's no cash flow, the private sector can't play. But if there is, we're going to have to double down in this space.
Let's move on to Rebecca, please.
Yes, so I think the point of the minister is exactly correct. I think what we don't realize is that actually not looking at adaptation is a potentially systemic risk, and we haven't quantified it yet. If you look at the numbers that are being thrown out, we hear something like 14 trillion of potential lost and stranded assets. But if we look at Deutsche Bank balance sheet perspective, we follow our clients' active economic activity. So if we look at where we're lending to infrastructure, we're lending to commercial real estate assets. 2/3 of the major cities in the world are on the coast. This is where our exposure is, and this is where our lending activities are actually exposed to these sorts of extreme weather events, rising sea levels, climate risk, flooding, etc. And the world hasn't really realized that the conversation has been primarily on climate mitigation rather than adaptation. The challenges are becoming more acute because now we have, obviously, when we look at climate mitigation, we've got fossil fuel price rises, and the real economic benefit of focusing the cash flows on climate mitigation versus adaptation. To the minister's point, this is absolutely where we need to call out the MDBs. Focusing MDB capital private investment on climate mitigation is a waste of their money. It's a waste of their focus. We need them to focus on adaptation, focus them on project and capacity build-up to identify where those adaptation projects are most needed. And to your point on nature, absolutely, the stats are horrific. 70% of our coastal protection is concrete, and 0% of that actually takes nature into consideration. So what that means is you've got invasive species, you've got lost water quality, biodiversity degradation. When you actually look at some of the solutions that are out there, and one of them is eco-concrete, where you're actually molding the concrete to bring in biodiversity, you get all the positive impacts of that on the global coastal system, and you get the benefit of a carbon sink. So these are the types of new solutions we need, because actually it's a potentially positive revenue generator. When you start thinking about carbon sinks in your coastal protection as a possible revenue stream for what is a non-profitable adaptation project. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Claire mentioned the MDBs. Marcus, what is your response?
Thank you very much. You can hear me? No, you can hear me, right?
Sorry, could you change the
Like this? Okay. Very much. I think it would be a good opportunity also to introduce the new development bank, which is this new kid on the block when it comes to multilateral finance. We are a child established 7.5 years ago by the biggest emerging economies in the world, the BRICS, and we have now started a process of membership expansion. So Bangladesh, Egypt, Uruguay, United Arab Emirates are also part of our membership now. And the very focus of our bank has everything to do with climate adaptation. We're there for infrastructure and sustainable development. We've managed to build a portfolio of about $32 billion of project approvals. So far, we're looking into the next 5-year cycle with another $30 billion in approvals. And for the complete experience of the first 5 years, essentially 25% of the resources approved in our mandate are climate related. We're pushing it up to 40% over this next 5 years. And on the question of whether you can bring in the private sector, I mean, one of the ways that we have found in this way, like echo what Jay had to say, is we are using a lot of the national financial institutions, like in the case of Brazil, the NDS, or in the case of South Africa, the BSA, as the last mile provider of resources. And we're managing to build the metrics along with them so that everything that is approved under those umbrellas can be considered adaptation. I think it's one of the way of democratizing the access to multilateral finance. The average ticket, for example, for a non-sovereign project at the NDB is $200 million, or sometimes it will make a world of a difference for a particular client over in India or Bangladesh to access a $5 million loan. So the role of the national financial institutions have been very important. We have concrete examples of investment, for example, in renewable energy, where our presence as an entity has actually accelerated the process of crowding in. For example, in the north of the state of Minas Gerais, in Brazil, where the biggest solar energy plant in Latin America is located. It is a very successful example. And I think when we look at the gap between the needs, very much discussed here, very high level, and the actual number that multilateral development banks as a family can provide, there is a canyon in between the two levels. So the more multilateral development banks we have out there, the better. I mean, in a juncture like today, as people think about the challenge of climate adaptation, I keep thinking to myself, if multilateral development banks did not exist, they would have to be invented. Because yes, indeed, they have a very important role to play in this journey in between where we are and having adaptation is something that is not only bankable, but maybe at the end of the day,
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Bola.
Can you hear me? I just want to build on what has been said. I think there is also the narrative itself. I mean, globally, the narrative was going mitigation, mitigation, mitigation. So all global financial resources from NDBs and private sector was going in that direction. It's until recently that, especially I come from the Arab region, where adaptation is a key issue in terms of the impact of the climate. So the narrative is starting to shift. In our region, less than 30% of the financial flows that's coming is coming from adaptation, while more than 70% is going to mitigation. It's rebalancing, and now we need to rebalance the narrative itself so that more funds are coming. The second thing, adaptation by nature are long-term returns vis-a-vis mitigation projects. So now the stimulus to have long-term projects and with the risk associated with it, where private funds has to come in, and I think NDBs has to play the role of de-risking certain elements so that to make it an incentive. So that we need to have this structural mix in the financing structure where projects or adaptation projects can have a combination between grant, concession and loans, investments and private lending in the mechanism as we move along. Third thing is data. Data and information is extremely important in the climate assessment and the climate narrative to be put forward, especially when we're doing the NDCs. NDCs are documents, but they are not bankable investable documents. Now we need to have capacity building to move these NDCs, which are demand-driven, on projects that is needed by countries, to make them move them to become bankable and investable project, so that we can bring on the financing as we move along. So even countries, not only the infrastructure environment, but also the issue of capacity building on the climate narrative and the climate vulnerability assessment and science-based is extremely important. Third thing, when we're talking about water projects and adaptation, a lot of this, also we have a water policy, and there is a reform on pricing of water and the returns on the project, as water is a right for a human being, and then the return on the investment is not that high for private sectors to come and invest or do the lending. So there is also that structure of the reform of the private policies on adaptation projects, especially the water project, so that to make it a mechanism to become a win-win situation to all parties and engaging various parties in the process as we move forward.
very much. I think as we are, time is running and we go quickly instantly to the second question. It's more like to the instruments, actors and approaches. Blended finance is mentioned quite often by General. What are the critical new elements in financing instruments that could be solutions in the context of adaptation challenges? Shall we take the same order and we can continue?
Happy to do that. Please tell me if you can't hear me now. Raising this. So I guess the first thing is that we haven't innovated anywhere near as much in the adaptation space as we have in the mitigation space. But that doesn't mean that the tools aren't there. It's just we haven't used them and really made them work. So let's just take a couple examples. That in infrastructure, resilient infrastructure will look like infrastructure from a financial perspective, right? And you have had classic areas that need mitigation for years, and they're pretty much the same. There are emerging markets credit risk. There's the FX risk. There's long duration project risk. There is the local market enabling environment regulatory risk, so think tariffs. And oftentimes there's off-take risk in these projects. And you need relatively strong off-takers at the end of any flow of projects, and you'll need to mitigate those. But all of those techniques have been developed in the infrastructure space. We're just talking about applying them now to resilient infrastructure. I proposed 5-6 years ago that we actually should have mandatory sustainable infrastructure, that there should be, just like we have with equator principles, that all infrastructure in the world going forward should have principles embedded in that infrastructure that makes them resilient. That's going to add cost. So there has to be some layer of funding of that cost. If that's all put on emerging markets countries right now, 42 some of them that can't fund themselves in the capital markets, that of course isn't happening. So there's going to have to be official mitigation. Next thing is that there are now NGOs, philanthropic organizations, and ODA money that is prepared to blend, not just in the mitigation space, but also in the adaptation space. And so that's going to happen much more. I mentioned co-lending. So a co-lending structure would be to take, say, NBE in Egypt and lend into them with mitigators like a GFC, like an IFED, that give a risk buffer to their agricultural co-op and farmer clients. That structure has been done, tried and true, around the world time and time again by the banking system. So we know that. Now, have we applied it as aggressively as we need to in ag? Absolutely not. We're going to get creative also with what I call dual track benefits, right? So, for example, again, UEFI has massive desalinization components embedded in the water needs of Egypt that will have to be funded. A lot of that is going to be driven by large renewable and green hydrogen players that come in and have to build that. Well, a lot of that water needs to be bifurcated and said, we're going to need it for the communities and we're going to need it for agriculture. So these are some of the creative structures that have to happen. Obviously, we wouldn't say 4% of adaptation is private sector if we were doing enough of these, but it's going to have to happen.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the tools, certainly if I think about how we deploy money to the emerging markets, I think the adaptation are going to be largely the same as my ask on the mitigation side. So, I think in the private sector we've been looking for much more deployment in the form of guarantees and partial guarantees to help us focus on how we allocate private sector capital to go into climate mitigation and adaptation. We'd love to see more of that. We'd love to see innovation in the form of taking those guarantees instead of as a vertical slice, we're taking them as a horizontal slice, so first loss. We call that funded capital, and very similar whether you're applying that first loss to a funded SPV vehicle which is managed, or whether you apply it to a single loan. But this helps mobilize capital, especially from banks and institutional clients where you deal with emerging markets, which typically tend to be below investment grade. The amount of liquidity and balance sheet capital that we can deploy to some investment grade is much lower than what we can do for investment grade. So if we've got that first loss and that can give you credit enhancement to bring the liability or the lending asset into investment grade, it really employs a lot more balance sheet and a lot more institutional capital interested in flowing into that. I think the other tools Jay mentioned, a lot of these projects have very long-dated cash flows in mitigations, PPA, we typically see long-dated local currency flows and then the need to hedge that risk through cross-currency swaps to access the dollar or euro market. Those cross-currency swaps tend to generate a very significant amount of credit risk that then needs to be managed. So again, applying these sort of credit enhancement tools to derivatives to help emerging market and developing countries access the foreign US dollar euro markets, I think is really important. I think we've seen also tax models used. So for example, in Maldives, we've seen the concept of a green eco tax, which is used. We've actually seen something similar in Rio and in Brazil, where these taxes are effectively used to support adaptation projects, coastal adaptation projects, and other requirements, and the banks finance against that revenue stream in the form of almost like a securitization of the tax receipts. I think probably one last thing I would say as well in terms of bringing in private capital and where the multilateral development banks can really help their role is focusing on the early stages of the project, so focusing on the construction phase and supporting the construction phase, because once the project is done and complete, then it becomes much easier to access either the capital markets or the term markets.
Thank you, Claire. Marcos, would you like to?
No, not much to add here. I concur that many of the innovations that can be applied to adaptation have been there in other areas of investment, be it to do upgrade and transfer. What I think is perhaps truly new here, especially when it comes to the concept of resilient infrastructure, is the amount of technology that you have out there that can be financed so that we can have projects and infrastructure that cater to both, for example, keeping cities from flooding and using that same technology to directly part of the local water to sanitation purpose. We have a couple of projects that we're financing there that have this characteristic. I think the name of the game is considered here. It is for finance. It is liquid finance. It is once again having the post-level finance be there from the very beginning until the project can work for other private sector projects.
Can you maybe, Marcos, comment a bit on the co-financing with the private sector side of the MDBs?
Sure. I mean, it's been, I think, one of the key characteristics of the present juncture that we're living in. That on the one hand, we have this enormous amount of resources out there that have been parked at very low interest rates and that are indeed looking for attractive use of capital. And on the other hand, dearth projects that are bankable, and those are mostly in infrastructure. Our experience so far has been able to build It's been successful when it comes to the examples, but of course in terms of scale, there's much more.
Thank you. All of this.
We at ESCO,
It's okay.
we looking into another dimension in terms of creating fiscal space for governments and creating more financing availability is looking into the debt swap. We have an initiative, climate SDG debt swap, Donor Maxis, and what it is, the idea of that initiative is to swap them on climate projects and focusing on adaptation, but in a program description, not a project, but a program for 2030, so that you lower the transaction cost and you expand the fiscal space of it. And this will help to engage after getting all the list of projects with the swapping is to expand the space where you can do also investments, private investments, not that we're not talking about borrowing now, we're talking about capital investments to the project, with the governments, especially when these projects are associated, so the early, and we have the early phase of the construction has been implemented by the government, so the risk is lower on that thing. At the same time, the KPIs for these debt swaps become SDG KPIs, where we are accelerating the SDGs also implementation as we move forward into that process. Because we do believe now government in our region, we are among the least emitters, but we are among the most impacted in the future. At the same time, our middle income countries in the Arab region are highly indebted also. So borrowing on a market, financial borrowing with high interest rates is not affordable to manage to address the climate impact in the region. So that we need to have another mechanism of financing, and this is where we're coming with the climate SDG debt swap to increase the fiscal space and look into the process another element of financing as we go along.
Thank you. Jay, what's the comment?
Yes, I just wanted to build on the debt swap conference so that everyone understands. In the earlier panel, you heard people talk about debt for climate, debt for nature swaps. Think of official debt, bilateral debt that a country, emerging markets country, owes France, Germany, Italy. And imagine that instead of contributing money to the MDBs as part of the 100 billion, that they forgive debt. But it's not really forgiveness. In fact, it's exchanging. And exchanging that debt, meaning that it is retired, but that it's the benefits of the fiscal savings by doing that go into a project. So typically in exchange, the exchange is some outcome. And the outcome can be the environment, it can be adaptation. So imagine that you want to do mangrove fields for coastal lines or eco-friendly cement. Major costs, and a lot of that is going to come from it's not high cash flow generating, but the government's going to have to spend on it. But where's the government going to get money for that? Well, instead of lending into that, we are likely to see an awful lot of debt pressures need some type of relief, and that will be exchanged in return for an outcome. That outcome could be any SDG, but particularly where the private sector struggles to play more. So the non-cash flow generating components of adaptation is where those governments can say, this is the outcome we want you to do. And that now is already on the plates of many of the sovereigns here.
Thank you. You received quite a good overview of different instruments, so very helpful. Let's move on to the final question, which is really interesting, also from the climate research perspective, about the barriers and as concretely as possible, how we see the barriers to private finance. Lack of information, low revenues, public interventions, lack of funds in general, lack of funding. technology and so forth. What do you, yeah, let's do the same one.
Okay. So actually in this case, the barriers are very similar in adaptation and mitigation. Because a National Adaptation Fund, a NAP, very similar to an NDC. It's a plan, it's a strategy, it's not financeable. You don't finance a NAP, you finance projects. And quite frankly, we don't have enough projects. And by that I mean feasibility study completed projects that can be given to the private sector. And so in the adaptation space, just like the private sector is saying, we have to go from the strategy of the NDC to an enabling environment that is invested in. The enabling environment has to be created as much in adaptation as it does mitigation. Favorable investment environment for the country, favorable investment environment for the subsegment, and that can be mitigation, that can be adaptation. And so one of the processes, Mark just walked in the room, Mark Hardy, if you think of the JET-P or country platform process, not only are you asking for greater ambition, but you would be asking for adaptation objectives and an enabling environment for those adaptation objectives. But then you have to say, show me the adaptation projects. And then, again, official money can say, I will help fund and or mitigate those projects. Similar to the JET-P methodology and energy transition. And then on top of that, you say to the private sector, what components of the cash flow positive, infrastructure resilient, ag, food investments can you come into and can the public sector pull? That is very much, in fact, that is what the African Development Bank has talked about, and David, you talked about that this morning. That type of mobilization layer is possible very much possible. But again, unless the African Development Banks of the world help us with the technical advice to get sovereigns to get the projects to the point that the private sector can step in, that's not feasible. So that's what we need.
Yeah,
Later.
I'll try to be brief. I think for me, the biggest barrier is actually just the capacity and bandwidth of some of the countries in terms of looking at how they need to prioritize everything they need to do. And certainly climate mitigation is a more immediate component. If you look at especially emerging market and developing countries, some of these countries have an electricity energy deficit. So they've got a shortage on hospitals, healthcare, education. So these are the natural projects which are going to take up the bandwidth. Adaptation, which is more protection against future possible events, are not yet in the priority. This is why I think it's so important to focus the limited capacity we have on the capacity building, but also getting the MDBs involved. So we really need to focus on where we apply our credit nets, where we apply our direct lending, because that is going to be the incentive that gets them to focus on adaptation projects.
Well, the barriers are there, and one of the ways to break them down, I think, is also the power of example. Here's another area where the MDBs can play a very important role. We're working on a project, for example, in Brazil that involves renewable energy, irrigation, and sustainable warehousing for ag. And here, we were very careful about developing a partnership with our clients, metrics that are aligned with adaptation criteria. And in doing so, we created the necessary template to use with other member countries as well. So one way, looking at one particular example that works and can be multiplied throughout the membership of a particular collateral development bank, creates that initial stage that is so critical for later on bringing in private sector resources.
I just add to Data is extremely important, especially to map on the private gap, financing gap, and so that government can have a better intervention on the issue. Capacity, the climate rationale on the projects is extremely important. Looking into the water, energy, food nexus in the project, within the project, so we're bringing out the co-benefits of mitigation, adaptation together in the discussion is extremely important. And I think that it's very important on the private sector also. There has to be an investment in the knowledge to the private sector on the importance of these projects so that the return, the stamina for long-term returns is there. The other thing is that the profitability return that is required is not like in commercial transactions. You look into a higher return of these types of projects, but you have to look into what I would call climate profitability return. So it's a different narrative to the whole thing, which is needing also the private sector to look into the matter and an education knowledgeable person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are closing the event now. Maybe just a few more quick little remarks. The Minister quite nicely started the discussion on really the need to set adaptation as both of them came up with. Adaptation is so that's gonna change after this meeting. I'm not sure about that. The systemic risk approach, nature is relevant in this role. We got quite good also selection of instruments. Many of them are being discussed here in also other panels. But normally the narrative right adaptation, it's more strategic issues. I think we will stop here. There is a view outside, and I know it's getting darker. So thank you very much for your responding.